Good evening. I'm Rebecca Klassen, Curator of Material Culture at New York Historical, and I'm joined by artist-in-residence Beatrice Glow, as well as project participants Brent Stonefish and Deborah Jack. Tonight, we'll be discussing the exhibition Beatrice Glow, When Our Rivers Meet, on view through August 18th. Before we begin, I would like to thank our trustees, our Chairman's Council, and all of our members and other generous donors. Your support allows New York Historical to continue to pursue our mission. The New York Historical Society is currently open Tuesday through Sunday, so I hope to see you in the galleries soon. Before we launch into our program, I want to let you know that it will last approximately 45 minutes, including 15 minutes for questions and answers at the end, which you can submit via the Q&A function on your Zoom screen at any point during the presentation. We have disabled the chat function, so please do make sure to use Q&A. After the presentation, we will get to as many questions as time allows. I had the immense pleasure of being the curator for When Our Rivers Meet, Beatrice Glow's artist residency project and culminating exhibition. Her project reckons with the 400th anniversary of the establishment of New Amsterdam, the Dutch colonial capital that grew to become New York City. She asked, what does it mean to commemorate this moment? How can the story be expanded beyond traditional narratives? The beating heart of this project is a collaborative parade that marks an alternative commemoration. This imagined parade, embodied by 7 maquettes for parade floats, acknowledges the intersecting stories that cross the indigenous Northeast, the Dutch Caribbean, present-day Eastern Indonesia, Suriname, and of course, the Netherlands. Those intersecting stories were forged, for better or worse, by the interests of 2 Dutch multinational corporations, which had the power to trade, make treaties, and wage war. The shared narrative space becomes a lens not just on our past, but our interconnected futures in pursuit of a world that all beings can not just safely live, but thrive. And to introduce all of these speakers today, Beatrice Glow is a multidisciplinary artist whose practice includes examinations of archives and collaboration with culture bearers and researchers in creation of sculptural installations, textiles, emerging media, and olfactory experiences. An American of Taiwanese heritage, she interrogates the visual and material languages of power to envision a more just and thriving world. Currently artist in residence at New York Historical Society, she is also a 2024 Creative Capital awardee. And among the many exciting past and future projects, she is soon headed to Perth, Australia for a residency exploring artifacts from the wrecked Batavia, a ship of the Dutch East India Company. And I'd also like to especially call out our gratitude to the National Endowment for the Arts, the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, and the Consulate General of the Netherlands in New York, among our New Amsterdam 400 sponsors, for really helping to make her project at New York Historical possible. And next is Deborah Jack, a St. Martin and Jersey City-based multidisciplinary artist whose work is based in video and sound installation, photography, painting, and text. Her work engages a variety of strategies for mining the intersections of history, cultural memory, ecology, and climate change. She currently has a solo exhibition at the Houston Center for Photography, and she received a 2024 Fellowship Award from the New Jersey State Council on the Arts. Deborah is currently a professor of art at New Jersey City University. And last but not least, we have Brent Stonefish, Turtle Clan, Eelŭnaapéewi from Eelŭnaapéewi-Lahkéewiit, or Delaware Nation, Moravian on Thames, in Ontario, Canada. Brent is an educator working on Eelŭnaapéewi language and culture revitalization. He has a BA in Native Studies from Trent University and a Master of Environmental Studies from York University. Welcome to all. Okay, could I get the next slide, please? So the first phase of Beatrice's residency was spent doing collections-based research. Generally speaking, she was interested in exploring materials that conveyed the 17th century Dutch worldview, as well as commemorative objects and events that have helped shape New York's perception of the Dutch legacy. The exhibition includes items from the collection that she used as a launching point for conversations with 9 cultural bearers, including Deborah and Brent, as well as her new body of work, which includes artworks created independently and in collaboration with those culture bearers. Next slide, please. So these screenshots are from a process video that is viewable in the gallery as well as on the exhibition webpage. I encourage you to take a deeper look. It succinctly illustrates how Beatrice took her findings in New York Historical collections and shared them with culture bearers to collaboratively generate designs for parade floats, which she then sculpted in virtual reality and 3D printed. So Beatrice, why did you feel it was important or appropriate to bring in other people to reflect on this anniversary? And also, what is the importance of collaboration? Why collaborate? And also for the people who aren't aware, would you mind saying a little bit about kind of what is a culture bearer and what connects this particular group together?
Sure. Thank you so much, Rebecca, for the wonderful introductions of our group. So to start with, I want to say that this word commemoration actually means to come together, to remember together. I think that's just something I always want to return to. And it's a moment where I was reflecting when we started talking about the residency, where there's a 400th anniversary of the establishment of the colony in New Amsterdam. And then I realized it's also 400 years of Dutch Formosa, which was when the Dutch East India Company occupied southern Taiwan, where my maternal lineage traces 25 generations back to. And that also underwent a very turbulent period that ironically is called Dutch Peace or Pax Hollandica. So for me, thinking about caring about New York and its deeper histories and its relationship to global histories, it just didn't make sense and wouldn't have been ethical or appropriate if I were the sole creative interpreter of this history, when this history we're talking about as under the Dutch East and West India Company's activities really impacted everybody. So with you, we thought we needed to make a very multi-vocal experience. And at the same time, we also realized that much of the dialogue that we're learning about throughout the world that discusses this global history is very fragmented because scholars often who do this work have to focus on more regionalized history. So as an artist and as creative practitioners, there's a kind of freedom to discuss interrelated impacts of history on a broad scale. So it made sense to then invite folks that I call culture bearers, people who, despite facing resistance, have continued to keep their culture and traditions alive. And so I wanted to learn from each other. And so we brought together in the circle reflection on the impacts of this history. So it's a really local and global conversation. I was focusing on folks that really I noticed are doing the work, no matter if they get recognition or not throughout their lives and their career and trajectory, whose families were impacted by displacement through Dutch colonialism or histories of enslavement and many other forms of violence during the Dutch Golden Age. And as we dug deeper into this history, it turned out that this history that we're talking about touched not just Northeast North America, it also touched regions including Suriname, Maluku, Papua, which is today's Eastern Indonesia, the Caribbean, and so much more. So we really created a constellation of voices and hopefully opens doors for many, many more culture and knowledge bearers to discuss these histories together. So I think of this as a beginning of collaboration.
Right, right. And can we get the next slide, please? So in terms of the materials that you looked at together, there were really 2 collections that kind of formed the core of your investigations. These included the James Hazen Hyde collection of allegorical depictions of the 4 continents and the records of a rather astounding event, the 1909 Hudson Fulton celebration, So these two prints that we're looking at here are from the Four Continents collection. The left shows a title page of a 1655 volume of Willem Janszoon Blau's Theatrum Orbis Terrarum, Sive Atlas Novus. So in English, that's Theater of the World or New Atlas. And it shows personifications of Europe in the top left, Asia in the top right, and at bottom we see Africa and America. And so this visual arrangement and the attributes of the figures in this print, and countless like it, really implied a cultural hierarchy with Europe at the top. And then at right, we see America in a print from the mid-17th century, which is really after a set of drawings by Martin de Vos done in the late 16th century. And we see America as an unclothed warrior riding an armadillo, and there are scenes of cannibalism in the background. So they're very suggestive images. Can we go to the next slide, please? Okay, and here we have a photograph and a design drawing from the 1909 Hudson Fulton celebration. So this celebration was a 2-week-long statewide celebration of New York's history, commemorating the 300th anniversary of Henry Hudson's voyage up the Hudson River and the 100th anniversary of the voyage of Robert Fulton's steamship Clermont up the same river. And it was this lavish celebration of technological progress, and one could even say New York's persistent sense of exceptionalism. And there were many facets to this extravaganza, but a big feature was this historical pageant, which we are seeing the evidence of here, a parade. It was really a lesson on New York's history told through 54 parade floats divided into 4 periods: the Indian period, the Dutch period, the English period, and the US or modern period. So each of these floats represented particular events in history or historical themes. So Beatrice and Brent, I hope you can share some of the reactions to the images from these Hudson Fulton celebration floats.
Sure. Well, Rebecca, we went through New York Historical's archives, finding aids, and when this folder popped up full of so much documentation of this parade, I just was so surprised, and I reached out to each culture bearer, and I think Brent had a lot of great insights, especially around these 2 images. The one on the left was called Indian Period, which I felt, and Deborah also has strong reactions towards. I don't know, Brent, you want to speak about it first? What did you think when you saw this in the slideshow I prepared for you?
Thanks, Beatrice. Yeah, I mean, initial reaction was to laugh, just because that it's for me, being Lenape, it's just blatantly shows the lens that the float creators came from, that it was not at all based in any type of reality for Indigenous people, and especially for my people, which we didn't have the big headdresses, and we didn't, is very homogenous in it in its creation, that we're all the same when we're not. And I think that was one of the huge pieces about it, and just that somebody is using their voice as ours, and I think that's the biggest piece that I got from that.
Yeah, and I think when I showed to Deborah, you said, "Oh, this is so past tensing by using the word Indian period," when we understand that Native peoples are very present in the region and thriving. And also, I think everyone really responded to the float that we have on the right, this design. And I thought it was quite an arrogant drawing, because the title said the first vessel built in Manhattan. And from the little that I've been able to learn is that this region, Manhattan, was and continues to be an estuarial bioregion with a really powerful and flourishing water culture. So, and then there actually are trees that were felled to make canoes, and that can carry dozens of people. So I don't know, Brent, if you want to say a few words, what you thought when I shared this with you on our many Zoom calls.
Yeah, I think I think one of the things is that, again, I always come back to the lens that we use, right? that this is somebody's idea of progress. Whereas, from my perspective and from this is that, progress for us is creating a relationship with creation. Progress is, doing that in consultation with the rest of creation, if you will. And so this is kind of, again, you know, uh, utopian, if not dystopian view, of Manhattanum, so that's where I went with that.
Yeah, before we look at the next slide, I just want to note that the people escorting the Indian period float, even though the parade did involve Indigenous individuals, the people escorting this particular float are from the Tammany Society and the Improved Order of Red Men. So they are actually white people dressed in red face. Okay, could I get the next slide, please? So here we see installation images of this parade, which is installed in a wonderfully undulating case that evokes a river. And Beatrice, the title of the exhibition, When Our Rivers Meet, is fundamentally about reflecting on our shared histories and collaboratively generating a shared vision of our present moment and of the future. Can you say a little bit more about the genesis of this exhibition title and its possible meanings? And also, what potential did you see in a parade as a response to the 400th?
Yes, thank you for that. So as I mentioned, we worked with 9 culture bearers for the project. And when I was visiting one Chief Vincent Man, Turtle Clan Eelŭnaapéewi-Lahkéewiit Nation, and Reimagining Man, 2 rivers away from the museum in northern Jersey, we took a long walk in the woods, and Mikhailin turned to me and said, Beatrice, I want you to know that in our culture, the place where 2 rivers meet is a really special, sacred place. And for me, that was very inspirational. And then I think, Rebecca, it was when I chat with you and some other fellow staff members that we kind of realized, Manhattan or Manhattan is an island that is situated and embraced by 2 rivers, and I really haven't really realized that until we kind of stood in the museum and we're looking at the space and realized that. So in a sense, we said, when our rivers meet is this very, I think, capacious way of inviting our exhibition visitors to be willing to listen to each other, to empathize and care, and be willing to bridge. And people come when they're ready at their own pace to listen to this history. And when, because it's going to happen, we have a future date to listen to each other. And that's kind of the spirit this comes together in. And I thought, why a parade? Well, Rebecca, you just showed that previous documentation of the 1909 Hudson Fulton Parade. And it just felt that there's this feeling when I looked at it that it didn't finish or tell a full story. And there were so many more stories that deserved to be told. And as you coined it, we needed a parade for all. So in that sense, I just thought, well, why don't we use the parade as a format to dive into the stories that should be more inclusively told? And so that's kind of why we came up with that format. And I think it's been really, really fruitful.
Yes, right. Deborah, Brent, what did you think when Beatrice proposed this collaboration with you? She emails you and says, or texts you and says, "Oh, let's do this collaborative parade float." I mean, what did you feel about the idea of a parade and lending your voice to it? And also, I'm curious about what you think are the necessary kind of conditions for a fruitful collaboration. Let's start with Brent.
Yeah, I wasn't sure who you were going to start with. Anyways, um, you know, first thought was, is this appropriation? Is this somebody, am I allowing somebody to speak on my behalf, or on my people's behalf, and giving that permission? And I had to look at that and say no. because me and Beatrice have been friends for quite a few years, and we've established a relationship with each other. And I know her work, and she knows my work, and she knows that, and she knew that we would work well together. And I knew and I trusted that she wouldn't try to speak on behalf of myself or on behalf of Indigenous people, that she wanted to share voices and tell a story together. And I think that was one of the biggest things that stood out for me for the collaboration. So she's my buddy.
Deborah, how about you?
Yeah, I think I had met Beatrice a couple times and before, but I also knew her work. After I think we initially met in 2014, it was like a really quick meeting, but I sort of stayed, looking at her work and seeing her practice. And so I think when she approached me, I was really excited about it because I had been seeing the work that she'd been doing, unpacking a lot of the issues around Dutch colonialism and sort of and the artifacts and all the sort of things that go with it. And so when she approached, I was really excited. I think there's a level of trust that I had for how she would handle the material, because I've seen how she's handled delicate material before in terms of this really complicated and history. And painful history, and how she's sort of used, engaged like beauty and sort of like objects that seem innocuous in a way, and to sort of help tell the story and to make visible stories that are not visible through like other senses like smell and touch. So I was really excited to sort of see where she would take this project. I was intrigued. So I think all those things sort of lend to a really good collaboration, right? You sort of have to trust the person that you're sharing these ideas with, and that you think that they'll be able to sort of visualize or realize these conversations that you're having with them.
Mhm. Great. Can we go to the next slide, please? Okay, so here we see the float that Beatrice created with Brent called Sigillum Manhattanum, along with the object that prompted it. So it was a late 18th century silver salver by Louis Feuchter that's on view in our fourth floor Luce Center. Beatrice, you included an image of it in this kind of massive collections PowerPoint that you shared with project participants. Why did you decide to include it? And then to you and Brent, why did you settle on this particular image as something to reconsider out of all the others? What is the significance of the imagery that you then transformed?
Sure. So, as part of the residency, I had the pleasure and the honor of looking through New York Historical's really remarkable collection. And this object really struck me because it's quite a large, substantially large silver salver. And on it, it's carved New York City's seal. And the seal, I mean, people see it around the city, you see it on your subway, wallpaper, it's everywhere. But I don't think we often sit down to reflect on the symbols in it. And when we start to look at it, you realize it really highlights a certain narrative that I think, along with many culture bearers, and particularly Brent, we wanted to kind of turn on a little bit on its head so we can start to imagine a different reality. So if you look at it, there is sort of the symbol, the windmill in the middle, which is a very now recognizable symbol of the Dutch. And on the left, there is a merchant, a Dutch merchant, holding a scale. And on the right, there is allegedly a Lenape, Lunapa, or Algonquian person holding a bow and arrow. And then there's objects that represent trade, such as the beaver and other trade objects. And then there's an eagle on top. And when I showed it to Brent and we talked about it, Brent had a lot to say. Brent, I don't know if you want me to share or you want me to. Okay, I see a smile. I'll say you could pop in if I say anything that you need to fill out. So Brent said, well, you know what, Beatrice, you said to me, Beatrice, in our culture, we are a matriarchal culture. So I would like to kind of see that the two men are replaced with two women, but a Dutch woman and a Lenape woman. But instead of standing very stiffly, performing this kind of stereotypical images, you wanted them to be kind of closely to the ground, showing children, right, how to care about the tree of life. So instead of a windmill, we had a tree of life in the middle. And then you said make the eagle a little bit more gentle instead of this very aggressive one. So I changed the eagle. And so it's kind of overlooking everyone with a little more care. And we wanted this to be a kind of a vision of how if New York City had a very different origin story where the Dutch and Lenape had come together with a mutual goal of caring for a place, what kind of environmental health we might be enjoying right now, and that's kind of this wonderful vision that Brent, you shared with me. Did I represent summarize some of our conversations correctly, Brent?
Yeah, no, that's exactly the stuff we talked about. And just, that, and then that the women are the givers of life. That had to be the major part, is that, the women are the backbone of our societies, because they're the ones that bring in those next generations. So that was a huge piece. And then we had the children on there as well to represent those future generations, as opposed to, just trade and commerce. It's about life and fulfilling purpose. So.
Right. So many of the emblems are tied to the region of the Northeast, right? And the lands and the marine habitats. Yet your community lives in Ontario, not far from Detroit. So for those who aren't familiar, would you mind briefly tracing the path your people took as a result of the forces of colonization and the present day efforts to kind of remain strong and connected to this region?
Yeah, I mean, it's a history of displacement. It's a history of forced removal, and genocide. I don't want to candy coat it for anyone's sake, but we were basically moved off the territory, off the island, and out of the area, and we were pushed. We were pushed and through war and declaring war on Lenape people. And part of us, part of the Lenape, ended up in a Moravian mission, and we slowly in order to survive, the only Indians that they wouldn't kill were Christian Indians. And so that's why we went into the Moravian mission, and eventually we continued to be pushed west and into Ohio, where we thought it would be our last our last spot to habitate, and then we were pushed right into through a massacre, pushed right into Ontario, Canada. And so that took over 300 years to get us there. So that was yeah, that's basically, it's about the diaspora of being moved. So.
Thank you for sharing that. Could I get the next slide, please? So in the course of the project, Beatrice, we explored the material culture and rituals of commemoration. And while we're not discussing the 400th anniversary of the founding of New Amsterdam as a celebration, but as a moment of reflection, in some ways, this alternative parade is a celebration, but of narratives that move kind of beyond conquest and dominance. For instance, an imagined future that is healthy and can hold all of our stories, right? So we thought about ways to elaborate on this idea of the parade and its kind of accoutrement, whether that be confetti or some other type of material manifestation. Can you speak to how you landed on these commemorative medals and what their emblems mean?
Sure. I've been looking at commemorative medals for a while. At a previous fellowship at the Smithsonian, I found many peace medals in the National Numismatic Collection, which were commemorative medals that the British and then later on the American federal government representatives would present to diverse Native American leaders as symbols of treaties. Yet often, as we know, many of these treaties were broken again and again. So when I was looking at New York Historical, I also found that there were many, many medals for different types of historical commemorative events, including that of the Hudson Fulton celebration. So I just thought, would it be possible if we create some kind of, because every commemoration has a swag, so we needed to have our own that kind of brought together the vision. So I took the seal that we developed with Brent in the previous slide, and we kind of made it into this alternate commemorations medal to represent that vision that truly is about peace, collaboration, and environmental stewardship, and the values of family. And so on the reverse side of every seal, it's kind of like collect them all, right? So we have different important non-human relatives of the region, including, starting from the left, the beaver, and then we have the tulip tree. We have on top, we have the sassafras, the turtle, and also oyster. All of this to kind of celebrate the region and all of us being in harmony with each other.
And Brent, you've been involved in at least 3, if not more, projects in New York City museums during this moment, as well as broader sort of strategizing efforts. And during your recent conversation with Beatrice and I, you were reflecting on this 400th anniversary and comparing it perhaps to how Lenape have been included in earlier evaluations of the region's history. And you said it was overwhelming because the Lenape were being showcased without being put in showcases. Would you mind saying a little bit more about what you meant?
Yeah, there's this term that they used to use in the way back last century in the 90s, that the Indian underglass, and 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 now we're at a place where we're taking a position, and we're taking space to be able to tell our own story with our own voice, and of course with our own voices, I should say. And it's overwhelming because all of a sudden people want to hear that, want to know the other narrative that is not based in a colonial lens. And so that's overwhelming because people come at you with all kinds of different ideas or wanting to know this, that, and the other. And it's going to take many of our voices to tell those stories. And I think that's what's overwhelming is that, the willingness, and it's just fresh, it's just starting. So that's what's with that.
Right. Well, speaking of sharing, let's look at the next slide. So Beatrice, throughout your project, you were always thinking about children and the next generations, from the ideologies that they've inherited to this future we hope to build. And I think I prompted you to consider the ways that youth were going to, tangibly engage with these messages in the exhibition. And we thought of all sorts of ideas, an activity station, which we ended up kind of jettisoning. But for the exhibition's opening weekend, our colleagues at Dimena Children's History Museum helped organize a drop-in art making workshop to redesign civic seals, and Brent participated as well. This was an incredibly fun workshop. What were your goals and what were your takeaways, Beatrice?
Well, I definitely enjoyed that as a wonderful way to think about children as our future leaders and honoring them by opening the weekend with them with a co-exhibition. So yeah, we were thinking a lot about, we talked about with Brent, looking at civic symbols. And many of New York City's borough seals, surprisingly, until I looked at it, I didn't realize have a lot of Dutch cultural influence and symbols embedded within. So in that sense, we thought, do we still want to keep some of these symbols? And including, for example, Queens still has a flag that is the flag or the heraldry of William Keefe, who was the governor that ordered the Pavonia Massacre, 1643, and Corlear's Hook. There are so many symbols we're finding that surprised us. So we thought, what are some of the updates we might be able to do? And so we thought inviting children to redesign seals according to what is important to them, how they love the city, and what they want the future to look like would be very important. We even had this conversation. Maybe we'll design seals and then submit it to civic leaders to have a kind of a petition to change our city seals. But those are all ideas we were floating. Some of the kids drew skyscrapers, transit systems that they're really in awe of. Some drew animals like the coyotes in Central Park and pigeons in Brooklyn. But also another one I really loved was someone drawing a creation story of Turtle Island and how that should be on a New York City seal. What I learned from all this is that.
Oh,
Okay,
I'm sorry. I think we should move on to the next slide. But please finish.
I was just saying that it was wonderful to learn from children and see what they envision it to be.
Great. Yeah. And it's very democratic as well. Could we see the next slide, please? Okay, so one back. Okay. Deborah and Beatrice, before we look at an image of the float maquette that you designed, which is so layered with meaning, I thought we could quickly look at a couple of slides that lay the groundwork for your thinking. So this is the Hudson Fulton Celebration program for Albany's celebration. On the left, we see an image of the program cover, and on the right, we see a description of Albany's fireworks show, which you both kind of have likened to a musical score. And what did you find compelling about this description?
Well, it was Deborah, please.
Oh, go ahead. Oh no, I was saying when Beatrice, we had gone through like an awful lot of slides at this point, and I think we were ending with this fireworks display. And at the time, I was thinking about all the images that I'd seen, including the images from the parade and the photos, which were and the drawings, the prints that were really compelling. But when we got to this, there was something about the language, as we went through the score and this sort of each section of these fireworks, the names were so intriguing, and because they were sort of marrying something, some of them were very floral. So like number 12, the Battle of Flowers, and then a 20 floating Fetsoon rockets, and like number then you'd had things like number 32, which was like flight of 22 jeweled cannonades. And so this marrying of sort of like, opulence, jewelry, which seems very decorative and innocuous, of flowers, and then marrying them to this sort of like violent language around explosions and cannons, was I thought aligned really interestingly with some of the things I was interested in. In the sense that things that seem really sort of innocuous. When you see number 25, it's like 24-pound rockets and forming enormous floating pearls. The language of it was just really sort of compelling to me.
Like poetry, right? Could we look at the next slide, please? So another departure point was Dutch still life paintings and the way they depict trophies and commodities from distant places gathered on a domestic table. And in particular, a launching point for you both was the incorporation of salt cellars. Deborah, as an artist, you use salt in your own work, both as a material and as a metaphor. Can you speak briefly to the significance of salt, especially in relation to the Caribbean islands that were impacted by the Dutch?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of my work is looking at salt. St. Martin, the indigenous name of St. Martin is Swaliga, which means island of salt. But then also that was sort of the main plantation industry for the Dutch on the island. We had a salt producing pond that naturally they were able to sort of harvest salt from. There was something that was happening that they did in Suriname and Bonaire, throughout the Americas. And so St. Martin was one of those sites. And so for me, historically, thinking about salt as a material that corrodes and preserves has always been at the sort of conceptual center of my work. But then also, knowing how valuable it was for the Dutch. It's again another sort of material that we have on our tables today and that we don't really think about. But here was this, mineral that was so vital to the Dutch in terms of their seafaring and the ability to preserve food on long voyages, and helpful to the sort of establishing of them as an economic power. And so again, it was sort of, looking at sort of Dutch still lives for me in my own practice was, thinking about here you have a table and all these sort of like, symbols of wealth that are presented. And the thing that sort of gives it away the most is this sort of the smallest, which is the salt cellar. So that was something then that I thought we could sort of explore, thinking about how St. Martin, which is like, 37 square miles, and only 16 of those are Dutch, right? So thinking about the smallness of that space, but how it could speak to sort of like a more sort of expansive idea of power and power dynamics, and how that can be cloaked in beauty.
And the beautiful image is the next slide, the float itself, transforming this idea of a violent past into a beautiful image. Can you, so the title of the float is Gilded Embers, Salted Entanglements. And Deborah and Beatrice, I'm hoping you can describe some of your thought process that took you from the image we just looked at or read earlier, and your arrival at this form. How does it speak to the Dutch Caribbean and its connection to New Amsterdam or New Netherlands? Deborah, can we hear from you first?
Oh, well, it was, I really wanted to figure out a way how to bring sort of salt into the conversation. I think when I was, we looked at a lot of the artifacts and the imagery, you didn't necessarily see or hear anything about salt. And so, but for me, again, it had to do with that idea of corrosion and preservation of history and memory. And then also thinking about the connections of the salt being mined from the surface of the pond, through evaporation, versus the salt mines that have to be dug out and excavated out of the landscape in New York State. And so comparing those two forms of excavation, right? One is more invasive than the other, but they both have sort of like lingering consequences. And so we wanted to bring those two salts together, I think, on this platform that then had these blooms that were exploding. And so Beatrice could sort of speak a bit more to sort of the use of flowers and the selection of the flowers. But that was, we wanted to bring salt in also too, as this sort of thinking about how it's used in ritual as a way to purify, as well as a purification for this space that we were that Beatrice was creating, in unearthing and thinking about all these sort of stories during this this moment, this reckoning in a way.
Beatrice, would you mind speaking very briefly about the flowers?
Sure, the flowers were very much inspired by the fireworks score that we shared a little bit before from the Hudson Fulton celebration. So I incorporated some of the language from there, such as golden wheat sheaves, battle of the flowers, these very gilded and militaristic language that sort of speaks to some of the contradictions of what meets the eye versus history, and trying to kind of find some kind of balance between those dialogues. And I also just want to point out that, yes, this is sort of in a way also an altar, because the salt comes from both the Dutch Caribbean and also upstate New York. So it ties together some overlapping histories of Black and Indigenous stories that we wanted to highlight.
Mm-hmm. And for those who aren't aware, there was a direct connection between the Dutch Caribbean and New Amsterdam via Peter Stuyvesant, who was director of both spaces at the same time. Could I have the next slide, please? Okay, so at the end of the exhibition, we have a viewing room for a film that Beatrice created in collaboration with Alexandre Girardot. And in our next slide, I'll have her talk about the film itself. But just very briefly, I wanted to address some of the themes that organize it visually, and that is something, Beatrice, that we haven't had a chance to really directly broach, but it is one of the metaphors that you were drawn to, which is this idea of the theater of the world. We saw in the title page of the Willem Blauw print, Atlas title page. And then we also saw it in optical toys from the 19th century that can theatrically make use of perspective, such as paper peep shows, like the one displayed in the viewing room, or paper theaters. I think you were initially drawn to the paper theater that's pictured in the lower left for its title, Theater Imperial, which we kind of mimicked the proscenium design for the installation. Can you speak briefly to why you found this idea of a theater so interesting?
Sure. I think about how a lot of these toys and games kind of created also notions or transmitted notions of cultural hierarchy and power to the children that they were designed for. So in a sense, I thought, well, in a sense, all these objects are performing for us. And so I also started to really become a little bit more playful in the creation of the works, thinking about how can an exhibition perform? And to that end, even though this is a visual art exhibition for the most part, I think of it as a multivocal orchestra where each of the works have a story to tell or a song to sing.
I love that. Can we go to the next slide, please? So here we see stills from that film that we referenced. It's titled When Our Rivers Meet, like the show. Beatrice, could you briefly describe what's happening in this video, which was filmed in a virtual reality space that you created, and why you were compelled to make it?
Sure. So this video is inspired a lot by the paper peep shows that we just showed in previous slide, and also the experience of going through archives and collections and learning and uncovering and studying. So I worked with my partner, Alexandre Girardot, who's a technical director of the video, to recreate the New York Historical's amazing library, so in virtual environments. And then when one is wandering through this tunnel of books, you encounter a paper peep show, also constructed in virtual reality. And in it was one kind of starts to kind of gaze into the whole of the book, time suspends, and you actually travel into the book that kind of comes to life and creates a microcosm of this future vision, right? So the viewer sort of has this bird's eye view where you fly between all the floats and you get to see them on a much larger scale than the parade float maquettes that are on view in the exhibition. And in a way, it kind of come to life this New York City parade where, yes, we are ready to rehearse and make reality this vision of caring and restoring Manhattan. So it really is kind of a sci-fi timeline that I hope becomes reality for all of us one day.
Great. And I'm going to take a look at the questions that have been coming in, but I want to know while I look at those from Brent and Deborah. As an expansion of your collective vision of a parade, what do you feel the experience that does this video installation offer? So in terms of your contribution to this parade, what does this add to the experience?
Well, I think for me, the fact that it started to move, right? I think that the whole sort of piece in terms of like incorporating virtual reality with a historical collection, I thought was a really great coming together of sort of like a future vision in a way, and sort of a way to interact with objects. It sort of also made the parade come alive in a really in a way that we wouldn't see the Hudson Fulton parade come alive, right? And so to be able to move through them and to actually see them sort of being used and in the way that, you know, Beatrice visualized, that actually seeing them moving and being able to fly over and around them, I think gives the viewer sort of a different read. I know that people, when they saw it, they saw the video and then saw things that they hadn't seen in the sculptural pieces and went back or hadn't noticed. And so I thought that was really wonderful to see.
Brent, what about you?
I echo Deborah's sentiments. It was very good. It was nice to be able to go around the objects and see all the little nuances and you know, and the shadows and everything like that that was created. And you know, and VR is just pretty cool, and many props to Alec for doing that. That was helping with that. That's awesome. So no, I really enjoyed that part too.
Okay, here's a viewer question for Beatrice. Can you speak a little about the process of how you created the float pieces? Why did you choose to use 3D printing and sculpting?
That's a wonderful question. Yeah, so I kind of think that VR is a wonderful tool in which I can create digital renderings versus physically making a model that maybe doesn't reflect the actual reality that I wanted to make. So this kind of baked into the process consent where both Deborah and Brent received many, many emails from me of many different versions of the ideas that we discussed. And we had to really think through whether or not different angles of the piece was correct, etc. Until we were all happy, we all signed off, and then I went to 3D print them. So it's a really literal what you see is what you get kind of process. And there's no surprises for them, I think, except for maybe you were delighted by the actual material quality of the piece. So I think it's a really truly wonderful way to collaborate and to co-envision together using these technologies.
And somebody wants to know if Brent and Deborah can expand more on projects they've worked on with other museums and where else we can see more of their work. So there's probably endless examples, but maybe just 2 highlights from each of you. Deborah, how about you?
Well, in terms of museums, the only well, I had a show that closed. My work was in the show where I also worked with archives, using images from the Dutch film archives of St. Martin. So, you know, thinking about using and working with sort of images of your people that you had no sort of say in and sort of reimagining them and bringing them forth and incorporating them and trying to create new visions is kind of a sort of interesting idea for me to work with and work through in terms of my work. Because before, a lot of the images that I shot were more about like sort of imagined histories or reimagining and sort of remembering of histories that I thought that I consider to be sort of dismembered. And so this was a really but the first time sort of working with an archive, like a material archive other than film, this was a really great opportunity to do so.
Brent, you're involved in something that's happening this very weekend, right? This upcoming weekend?
Yeah, at MCNY Museum of the City, New York, we're having a kickoff event, Lenape celebration at this weekend, Saturday and Sunday. It's a kickoff to an exhibit that will be coming out in October of 2025, but we're going to have a bunch of events leading up to it. And so if you're around and you know where MCNY is, that's where we'll be from 9 in the morning till I think is into the evening on Saturday. And then we're also working on 2 weeks from now. I'll be going to the opening of a Lenape exhibit at the Amsterdam Museum in Amsterdam. So we're pretty excited about that. I'm pretty stoked to go to that, and we've spent a lot of time trying to put that together as well. So that's where I've been busy. Understatement.
Right. And a final question for Beatrice. Is there anything, this is a big one, a doozy. Is there anything that you were not able to include in the exhibition that you do wish you had the time or space to include?
Oh,
Were there
wow.
pieces from were there pieces from New York Historical's collection that intrigued you, or the work of another culture bearer that was unavailable?
There are so many ways we can dive into it, but I'm actually just imagining if we had even more space that I would love to build out that paper peep show book into a life-size experience so we can all walk through together. So I'm just proposing that as a big New York City public sculpture experience right now on this call. But that's really an experience, and we were able to turn that video, that paper peep show book, into an actual paper peep show book as a follow-up to that experience. But that was really done almost right to before the show opened, so we weren't able to include that. But it was a really wonderful way to think about expanding and decompressing history every time we opened this accordion of a book, and how our stories will continue to expand, evolve, and hold our circles. So such a lovely question.
Great, thank you. Thanks to all of you. We have unfortunately run out of time. Thank you so much for your participation and for your exceptional support of the New York Historical Society. We also hope you can come see Beatrice Glow When Our Rivers Meet on view through August 18th, 2024. To learn more about the incredible stories featured in the exhibition, I will be posted in the gallery answering any of your questions during a Meet the Curator session on Friday, May 30th at noon. You can also schedule a guided tour with one of our wonderful docents or explore the exhibition's audio guide on the Bloomberg Connects app. Thank you so much.